A 28-year-long study is showing that as the oceans warm, whale competition for food is intensifying. And while right now they seem to be doing okay, this does show increasingly bad signs for the future. Welcome back to Tea of the Sea, and by now most of you know that human accelerated climate change is affecting our oceans, mainly in the form of warming temperatures. And this is starting to affect food stocks, animal distribution, and in the near future, potentially even changing the very currents that power all of this. And while every animal reacts to a changing environment in different ways, we generally see a trend where larger animals are affected first when these type of changes begin to happen. And in the North Atlantic, we are starting to see some of these changes in the great whales that live there. Whales are the largest animals alive today, and in some cases they're the largest animals to have ever existed, but they only got to the sizes that they have because they feed really low on the food chain on highly nutritious items like krill and herring and capelin, etc., etc. And this means that they are one of the first animals affected when environments begin to change, specifically when changing environments affect the food stocks that they rely on. In the North Atlantic, we are seeing some of these changes, like a warming ocean temperature, less ice in the wintertime, busier shipping lanes, and a more industrial fishing industry. And all of these changes are affecting these whales, and we are seeing these effects in the prime feeding location for whales in the Gulf of St. Lawrence. In order to adapt to these environmental shifts, whales need to change when they're arriving to feed, what they're feeding on, and even how they're feeding in order to survive. And a new study that looks at the last 30 years of foraging behavior across several species of large whales shows that this is a problem happening now, not in the future. So this study, led by Charlotte Tessier-Lariviere, looked at the foraging behaviors of 3 different whale species: minke whales, humpback whales, and fin whales. And they have found that as Arctic krill specifically is being consumed less, the fin whales and the minke whales are beginning to shift to pelagic fish, putting them in direct competition not just with each other, but with humpbacks as well. Of course, tracking whales across the open ocean is nigh impossible to do for any sort of long-term study. It's just really difficult to keep an eye on whales for that long. So the team relied on skin samples acquired over the last 28 years. In total, they collected 1,100 skin samples across these 3 species, and using nitrogen and carbon isotope testing, they were able to determine what the whales were feeding on over that time and where the whales fit in the oceanic food web. By grouping the skin samples into 3 different time periods across those 30 years, the team was able to see the patterns in whale foraging behavior. And what they found is that the food in the Gulf of St. Lawrence is likely shrinking, but the whales are adjusting to what food is still available. All 3 whale species shifted their diets a few times across the 30-year period. For example, in the 1990s, fin whales were feeding primarily on Arctic krill, but they shifted away from that krill in the 2000s to consume more mackerel, capelin, and herring. And then in the 2010s, they shifted once again to consume more northern krill and sand lances. Minke whales earlier in the study's time period were focusing primarily on pelagic fish, but as time went on, they began to shift more to that northern krill. Humpback whales stayed more consistent, generally feeding on multiple different species of small fishes, but even they changed their diets based on the available food throughout that time period. These dietary shifts show that the whales are somewhat flexible. They're not relying on a singular food source, which is a good thing. It puts them at less of a risk of a population collapse. The study also found that complete competition exclusion wasn't really happening. As whales were shifting to similar food items, one species wasn't driving out another from the area, which shows that the environment is still healthy enough to support multiple species feeding on the same prey items. The study does have some limits. Isotopic data like this doesn't always show exactly when and where an animal is feeding, and some prey items are just simply too chemically similar to really determine which species are contributing more or less to a whale's diet. Despite those limits, the data shows that the whales are changing what they are feeding on, and long-term studies like this are really important because short-term studies can't show these long-term trends that animals are going through as the environment changes around them. For whales in the North Atlantic, it's clear that while they are adapting so far to a changing environment, as those changes continue to occur and potentially even get more extreme, the whales are going to become more and more competitive with each other as their available food options dwindle into a single option potentially in the near future. And protecting these animals means protecting the environments that they rely on to survive every single year when they migrate to feed. For areas like the Gulf of St. Lawrence and the North Atlantic, changes in the environment driven by human accelerated climate change is not going to just affect the whales and the fish they rely on to stay alive. We are going to be affected because we rely on those exact same food sources. And if we don't do something, we will lose not just these amazing animals, but our own lives as well.